Hey guys, I'm Doug.
And I'm Theo.
And today we're going to talk about common mistakes you're making that are hurting your hip health.
So the hip, it's a pretty important part of the body. It transfers energy from the ground up to the upper body. And what we typically neglect is what we're going to go over today and see if you pass the test, if it's maybe some homework you need to work on, and maybe save yourself potential injury.
Number one on the list is
Footwear. So I know a lot of us like to gravitate towards a certain favorite shoe. Typically, Olympic lifters are a common shoe of choice these days. And what we're seeing a lot of is with that Olympic shoe, it's okay with your squat. You're pushing the numbers a little bit. So yeah, you get a little bit of extra stability around the ankle. You can root, you can ground your feet. You've got a good platform. But if you just leave that shoe on and then you go and do your box jumps and then you're doing some maybe overhead pressing and then you're lunging and you're doing all these other exercises where that shoe is actually offsetting the position of your ankle to where your body has to make up for it. So the higher that heel, the more your body owes that range of motion. It's going to pull it from somewhere else.
that 3/4 inch drop is pretty significant.
It's pretty significant. So when you're squatting, it's okay. But when I'm overhead pressing and the person's lower back is making that hard arch, or if they're doing a box jump, it's a shoe that's not ideal for impacting. You see a lot of overextension in the hip joint, a lot of stress to the structures in the joint itself. So you're maybe stretching that a little bit too much in a starting position, and then you're going in the opposite direction, and you're dropping into like a squat or like the top of a box, and you're kind of slamming that joint back into the opposite direction. So I think Olympic lifting shoes are okay, but just specific to the activity, because you wouldn't go out and do your turf work, or you wouldn't go play anything with like multi-direction in Olympic lifters. So, just be careful of always getting stuck in that shoe, because if you have to wear those when you squat, maybe we need to figure that out, because maybe we need to address your ankle restriction. But yeah, absolutely. If you had ankle reconstruction and the structural damage is there and it's different, it gives you a little bit of a benefit. Sure.
That doesn't actually apply to most people.
Doesn't actually apply to most people. Some.
Nice exception though. And so in addition to that, when we talk about people who have this goes back to other video about ankle mobility, which is now upstream in the hips with the Olympic lifters. When you work mobility into your chain, now you can go to Converse All-Stars or like a zero drop shoe, and you won't feel as much tightness in the range of motion, right?
Right. So you watch what your favorite athlete is doing, and yeah, maybe they're dropping all the way down, but maybe their hip structure is a little different. Maybe they're shorter. Maybe they're a little leaner. Like there's a lot that goes into the depth that maybe you should be squatting or maybe should be moving. And I think that's lost with some of the fly-by fitness trends you see, where it's like you have to break parallel, or you have to get as low as you can go, and don't worry about form, just get there. Yeah, if you make that drastic shift from an Olympic lifting shoe where you've got a high heel and then you're going to a flat, that shouldn't happen overnight. Like you need to follow a progression to let your body adapt to it, especially runners, because if you're changing from a really, really very built up, cushy shoe and you go to like a flat, no support shoe, yeah, you're leaving yourself open for stress fractures and like all kinds of tears and things. Yeah, it takes time, which I know in our culture, it's like, well, I want it yesterday, but you gotta put the YouTube Olympics away and just follow what your body needs and just take your time and you'll get there. So you just got to be patient.
Just like every other shoe video here at SOFLETE, it's MET-TC dependent. Number two is
volume, increasing your volume too quick, and especially when it applies to a plyometric. When you talk about like any kind of like a jump or speed work where it's a rapid deceleration followed by explosive movements, it takes a lot of control, and they're not for everybody, but it's best to do the technical work in the front. So you wouldn't start with a plyometric, but you would, you properly warm up, you'd kind of get the body going, and then you would work on maybe a couple rounds, like 2 sets of 5 low box jumps or something.
Conveniently, we program all of our plyo work pre-strength block.
Yeah, exactly. So nervous system stimulus, perfect way to do it. You're going to be stronger with your more complex movement. The opposite effect is when you put it at the end and you just do 100 box jumps for time as fast as you can. Form doesn't exist with that. And you end up putting, especially the hip, you put your hip and your back at risk, your knees. You put yourself at risk for like more likely of an injury. Or if you're doing something like a lateral single leg hop, these positions where like you've never done a single leg lateral squat or just stood on one leg and reached out to the side, but then you're going to add speed to that and like rapid deceleration and acceleration. So And anytime you add speed, it's an easy recipe for an injury.
Plyometric work is meant to elicit a specific output. Like you're supposed to be developing a skill related to power.
Yeah.
And so the idea that we're doing plyometric work for volume, like it falls right back into what we say, like anything that's volume for volume's sake is shit. When you see a high volume of plyometric work, you should be questioning the program, especially if you're looking to gain some sort of athleticism. It's not going to come from 100 box jumps at a time.
Right. Yeah, it is. Like essentially is an easy way out. Like you can make anybody feel like they got a workout in by adding volume, but if it's not the quality of that program, yeah, you're essentially just wearing yourself down, and you're inevitably going to run into an injury. Okay, so anything works for a short period of time. Like, I mean, everything works, but
there will be people who comment on this video that we don't know what we're talking about. Maybe you're the genetic freak for whom volume for volume's sake is wonderful. They exist.
They do. I mean, outliers. Yep.
Yeah, and they're crazy. I mean, it's crazy. We hate them. But I mean, also, if you're that person, man, hey, you don't need to leave an angry comment at the bottom of this video because we've made an exception for you.
Yes.
Number 3.
Focusing on the weight on the bar instead of the bar speed. And we see this a lot with Olympic lifting, specifically cleans. So I think cleans are a great movement. If you've done them your whole career, if you're comfortable with them, send it. Great movement. If you're trying to get into maybe some more explosive work and you're dabbling, you've got a friend or you're following somebody and you think you're ready. The trick with the Olympic lift is the hip speed is what's the most critical. The hip and bar speed is really what we're after. It doesn't matter how much weight is on the bar. To me, I want to see, can you actually open up your hip and let that bar, if you had to let go of that bar, what is the bar doing? Is it floating? Is it still on its way up? Or are you now in this weird reverse curl because your hip didn't do what it was supposed to do, and now you have to reverse curl it? So you're going to see a lot of elbow injuries, a lot of elbow issues in general, and it's just because the hips are slow, because they're not providing the power and that position that they should be able to help you get that bar.
It's one reason why we recommend with Olympic lifts that you get yourself a competent coach, because a competent coach is going to be able to tell when your form's suffering based on a slower bar speed, a slower hip speed, and coach you out of adding that extra like 2 kilos that you think you've got for a PR effort. It's also one reason why outside of our competitive athlete program, we don't really program snatches in most of our stuff because it's a high skill oriented movement that is like bar speed is everything. And most people aren't capable of actually measuring themselves, like self-assessing. Hey, was that bar speed good? So a lot of the barbell work that comes with power development and with clean work is focused around movement quality and bar speed, but the cues from the coaches virtually are a lot more about like when you feel like your form's sacrificing, like if you're kind of catching it in the sprawl where you're like, like, hey, now your bar speed is certainly like, you started to sacrifice bar speed well before you got to that point. But when you get to that point, you know it's time to knock off for the day, right?
If your thought of a clean is like your chin is scraping the ground because you're dropping that low to really get under that bar, I mean that the weight's probably too high, or the hip is not doing what it should. You should be able to generate enough force, and I think that's where kettlebells work really well, because the kettlebell keeps you accountable. If you're driving through your hip, you can see that bell just floating up, and you just scoop under it. Whereas it's still right here, and then it's a lot harder to cheat through that.
And you're going to feel it slam on your forearm.
Absolutely.
If you're over pulling. So there's a lot there. When you put too much weight on the bar, you're welcoming an opportunity for injury. It's the bar speed is important for your development as an athlete, but also you're going to have long periods of forced rest based on injuries that you get in your stabilizers trying to catch too much weight too slow.
Yeah. And a lot of the hip tears we'll see, and I didn't see these things, gosh, like 6-7 years ago. It wasn't very common, but now we're seeing some pretty nasty injuries to the hip specifically, just because of just like training errors that could be avoided. A lot of the strength coaches I know that work in like professional sports, they don't allow their athletes to actually catch. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you've got maybe a lineman or somebody who's this is their paycheck and they need to be able to throw, if they're cleaning, it's not catch it and do what you need to do. I want you to really slam that wrist up. They're exploding, and then they're sort of letting the bar drop.
Clean pulls. Yeah, for
just
sure.
really just trying to take the shoulder out of it.
We program those too.
Yeah.
Hey-o. Which brings us to number 4.
Learning how to hip hinge. And this is something you've probably heard of a lot. And the box squat, you guys should be familiar with. You've heard of a box squat. So when we're talking about a hip hinge, it's initiating movement from your hip. So, whether somebody's coming in with knee pain, foot pain, back pain is a common one. Really setting a good foundation to allow that hip crease to absorb the weight. And you just don't see that enough. You see speed goes up, or maybe the weight is in a position where like the person's just trying to get in and out of the movement, just get those reps in, and you'll see a lot of that like knee bending. And that's an absolutely, you want to jack your knee up, sure, that's the way to do it. But if you can just teach yourself how to box squat, goblet squatting is one that's a really good way to just teach yourself how to create that hip hinge.
We're talking about box squat. You're talking about squatting to a seat.
To a seat, yeah.
Yep.
Just sitting into a chair. Just don't think about it. And like, how did you get into that chair? You didn't scoot it up underneath of you and force yourself down. You reached for the chair. So, in an athletic population, being able to box squat or hip hinge really dictates everything.
Well, even in an athletic population who are moving a lot of weight, you still have a lot of people who are just turning their glutes off to fall into chairs.
Yeah.
Or they're utilizing stretch reflex to hit the bottom of a squat and bounce out of it to move more weight, which goes back to point number 3. We were talking before this about things like the 3-rep max trap bar deadlift for the ACFT being a good example of why learning a hip hinge is important, because people are trying to replicate a conventional deadlift in a more of a dead squat, odd type
squat lift.
The apparatus and the terrain are forcing people to change the way they're used to lifting.
Yeah.
And they're not trained for it.
Yeah.
Which is going to be problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see somebody that's shorter, they've got shorter limbs, so they're really having a hard time getting into a proper position just to grab the bar, but they've got to do it. And then you add, maybe a parade field or somewhere where you don't have an open gym floor where the surface is flat and even. So now you've got an uneven surface. Like, what is that going to do? Like, that's not ideal. You want to be locked in. Like, when you're underweight, last thing you need is somebody to come over and push you or try to throw you off balance. So with the hip hinge, whether it's the squat or the deadlift, you're initiating the movement the same. It's what does your shin look like? And if your shin stays, like your tibia, the lower part of your leg, if that stays vertical, in your training, that's where the difference is, because you should be able to keep that vertical with a deadlift, because now you're activating posterior chain. It's when you start to turn that hip hinge into more of a knee bend, now we're loading quad. So it's more of just like an efficiency of training. Like if I'm training and I'm somebody that wants to know that I'm balancing out maybe quad, glute, hamstring, posterior, anterior chain, I really have to be aware that I'm not turning my deadlifts into squats, because now I'm just overloading the quad. So the movement's always going to start from here, but it's really making sure that you're keeping that shin vertical. And since there is no technical standard with the ACFT, just keep your spine flat, don't round your back, get down there and grab that bar any way you can. And as long as you're doing that, send it.
Honestly, if more people learn how to activate big movers for hip hinge stuff, I think we'd see a significant reduction of just day-to-day injuries.
Oh, absolutely. Well. Yeah. I mean, I treat, like they always say, your favorite athletes, they're really good compensators, and they can just muscle through just about anything, and they're just God-given talent, and they're very athletic, and they are, and you see it all over the place. But I'll still talk to people about technique, and they can move a lot of weight, but they're not using their lat. They're not creating tension through their feet. They're not spreading the floor. They're not doing these little cues that take all of that pressure off your back, off of your knees. Like you're spreading that load out, and then they all of a sudden kind of pop right up, and they're like, wow, that felt really good. Like it didn't hurt my back. So slow it down. Tempo training. I think my version of a box squat is not to actually completely sit. Like I use it more of a tap, and then as you develop that control, then you can start to turn it into more of like a sit, unload, and then explode or drive back up. But again, you got to make sure you're not progressing too quick.
Just from a physio standpoint, I know that something that people will ask in relation to a box squat is the tap above parallel, perfectly parallel, or below parallel? And how are they? What is the best way to start that? Yeah,
so it depends on your anatomy. If you have somebody check your form, and there's a drastic change in your spine's position as you hit parallel and then below parallel. You really start to see that little butt wink. Start higher and get that control. Maybe have somebody check it out. We do all kinds of sit back tests, like check the ankle, like we'll look at the hip. Can your hip even get into that position? But we know like longer femurs, you're going to have a harder time getting down into a deep squat, whereas maybe somebody that's shorter, they can get in and out all day. Yeah, ideally, the deeper the squat, the better. You're going to utilize more muscle tissue, more fibers, but you really got to go off of what your form looks like, because the goal is not to just bottom out every rep and then do what you need to do to get back up. That's where I end up seeing a ton of injuries, and not just the hip, that's anything, knee, neck, shoulder, back.
And moving on to our last, fifth, and final point.
Single limb training. So it's great. We're building all this strength and, your numbers are going up. Everything's feeling good. If you're not implementing single limb loading, such as a split squat or, Bulgarian split squat or single leg deadlift, a step up, all these movements are, one, they're unloading your spine. So
first of all, you don't look like an idiot in the gym or single limb anything, right? Yeah. Like it highlights all of your inefficiency of movement. This is another thing where people should start light.
Well, yeah, and if your balance sucks at these, then it means you need to do it more. So it's self-corrective in that regard, because it is. If you look at some very strong individuals cannot control any weight, really, but even like half their body weight in a proper like single limb loading, where maybe they're controlling the eccentric load on the way down. There's like a 2-3 second count. They hold 1 second and then explode up, and they come back up and they're off balance, or even on the way down, the hips rotated. So if they are challenging and you notice there's an issue, then that just sells it even more. That's why we need these, because most of the injuries we see are deceleration. It's being able to control your body weight, slowing down, maybe to change direction, knowing that your dominant leg is not light years ahead of your non-dominant leg. There shouldn't be that drastic of a discrepancy.
It's worth making a mention to anybody who's going to start doing like single limb movements that the first set and even the second set may feel shaky and unstable, but you're probably going to see progress across the sets. Don't quit and give up just because you tried it and you felt like Bambi.
Yeah.
Do the prescribed sets. Do it with less and less weight if it's a problem, but make sure you're doing the movements, and you'll see the progression, even in just one training session where your body's like, aha, this is what I need to do to not be hurt. Yeah. Obviously, pain you want to avoid, but the instability and uncertainty of the movement and feeling like an idiot shouldn't dissuade you from actually doing the work.
Yeah, like very isolated motion. So a ball and socket joint, when you're in a single limb position, just by lifting this leg up, if I turned everything off, I would literally fall. So, it's a force couple. You have rotation forces on both sides. And if they're symmetrical, if they're equal, it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to stay nice and stable. Creating that awareness and just putting yourself in a single limb position. Maybe that tightness you feel around the back, maybe it's not tightness. Maybe it's just a coordination issue where the muscles don't know how to control it. So that's what you're doing. But if you're just in the gym every week, just heavy compound movements, like double feet on the ground, those like tiny like fractures and muscle tears that you're creating, like you're not allowing your body to actually recover. So, for the majority of us, you almost have to incorporate some simple like single limb movements in, because you're still you're training the area, but the volume's completely different. You're putting your body in a complete different plane, but it's more applicable to life. So you can actually go out and not have those like, career-ending injuries where the knee just blew out. It's tough to catch yourself when you're self-critiquing yourself. So we're all guilty of it though. So we all have issues.
Videotape yourself. Don't just feel like an idiot. Look like one on camera too. Or get a coach or spend some time with a PT like Theo and get a little bit of guidance on what the best practice is for moving forward. We just went over 5 mistakes that you're probably making. If you found this to be helpful in your journey towards injury prevention and making yourself a more durable athlete, then like the video and click subscribe. We're going to have a link to Theo's physical therapy page in the description. And if these things actually helped you, leave a comment below describing exactly how it is that you found the way forward.